welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, once again for another episode of College Football Pros. I, as always, am your host, Nicholas Valinchak, and my co-host, Drew Van Jura, is here as well. And today we are very excited to have our second special guest on this show. He is part of the 2002 National Championship Ohio State Buckeyes team. He is also a former NFL cornerback, and now he puts the action in Maction for 92.3 The Fan out of Cleveland. Dustin Fox. Dustin, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, guys. How about you?
We're excited to talk about the MAC. This is actually one of our favorite conferences, so we're really excited to have you here to talk about it today.
Yeah, it's good to be with you guys. Obviously, here in Cleveland, it's sort of the center of the MAC universe. The offices are located here, and there's obviously a lot of talk about the teams and with the local teams, Kent State, Akron, who we talk about, and a lot of people in the area, our listening audience, and of course Bowling Green and Toledo as well, teams that people want to talk about, and it's always fun. They don't get a lot of pub. But they have over the years, and I think ever since their partnership with ESPN, it has allowed, I think, people to see them more frequently, obviously, with the Tuesday night action that you see during the week. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's been a blast to see what they've done in the midweek games. But Dustin, real fast, we'll touch on this real fast and we can move on back to the MAC. But being a diehard Miami Hurricane fan, the 2002 National Championship game, the 2003 Fiesta Bowl, you killed my Canes, but I got one question. Was it pass interference? Was it pass interference?
Yeah, of course it was pass interference. Are you kidding me? It was a blatant call. It seemed like it took forever for the referee to pull the flag out of his belt and actually make the decision, but I think it was the right call. And for all the Hurricanes fans out there who are angry about it, want to fight about it, my goodness, there's a million other plays, a million other missed calls throughout the game. And by the way, it went to double overtime, and Miami had many opportunities to win the football game. They just weren't able to do it. And again, if they want to, and I say they, I mean Miami fans want to hold on to that. My goodness, let it go. That was a dynasty there with the Hurricanes for a while.
Yeah, absolutely, and I definitely don't want to fight with you, obviously. However, one question about that game, you had that interception. How did that feel just to pick the ball off in a game that meant so much?
I was surprised, to be honest with you. I was playing like backside corner on a play where, I didn't even think they were even looking my direction. And I think Ken Dorsey was on a different page with his receiver, Roscoe Parrish, and he just throws his football up. It was kind of like a punt. It comes in. I'm like, my goodness, I just got to make sure I catch this thing. I kind of caught it like in my breadbasket and jumped up and was like, just don't drop it. And then obviously got tackled by an offensive lineman, so I wasn't too proud about that.
So obviously you have a great deal of experience in the realm of football, both collegiately and professional ranks. What ended up bringing you to get involved with the MAC?
Well, it's one of those things where it was an opportunity because, I didn't have a lot of experience calling football games in general, especially not college football. And there was an opportunity because of the partnership with ESPN and the conference that every game's broadcasted on some sort of their platform. And most of the games that I'm doing are on ESPN3, of course, on your device or whatever, however you watch the conference. But my agent was able to get in touch with ESPN and sort of got my foot in the door. And so this will actually be my third year calling the games. And last year I got a chance to do the conference media day, interviewing all the coaches, all the players, and I'll actually be doing that again next week up at Detroit at Ford Field. It's a lot of fun, and you learn more about the conference as you go. I mean, my first year doing it, I didn't know a lot about the teams and the players, and I, frankly, from an outside perspective, just thought it was a different level of football. But my opinion of the conference certainly changed as I was able to cover it and talk about the teams and the players and seeing all the talent that they have in the conference. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, and you talk about the midweek games, before and how they've really carved that niche out. I mean, do you think that is – obviously it's helped the MAC, but in the point of recruiting and with the eyeballs on the product, how big is having those midweek games?
I think it's huge. Look, it's not necessarily great for teams because they have to change their schedules up, and sometimes they end up with a short week trying to prepare for a Tuesday night or a Wednesday night game. But having the exposure of being basically the only thing on, and look, football fans, the consumers love football no matter whether it's a Sunday night NFL game or a midweek MAC game or a big college football game on a Saturday. They just want some football. And so it allows kids, high school kids I should say, the opportunity to see these teams play. They know the names. They know where the schools are located, the coaches of the programs, obviously. And so as an athlete, when you go to college and you want to play football, you want to be on TV. You want the exposure. And the ultimate goal as a high school kid is you want to try and play at the next level in the NFL. And the MAC has allowed that to happen. They've allowed, with the exposure on ESPN and obviously the talent that has gone to the NFL, it gives the kids a chance to do everything they dreamed of. And that's, again, play big-time college football in front of a lot of people and be on a stage that can allow you to get to the next level.
Dustin, I'm right there with you. Last year was my first year really watching the MAC, and most of the reason for that is because Drew and I are also avid daily fantasy players. I'm not sure if you're in the loop of what that is exactly, but it's blowing up huge right now with the national companies and companies like Yahoo getting involved with it. So having something to do in that week time where you had players you didn't know really caused you to study deeper, and there was just so much excitement for me watching Toledo lose all their quarterbacks and end up with an emergency quarterback like Dwight Macon having to start 2 games, and the transition in Northern Illinois from Jordan Lynch, who was just an amazing asset to the MAC in general and to that team, to a quarterback like Drew Hare, and just seeing how that program developed, and watching Kareem Hunt just absolutely destroy Arkansas State in the GoDaddy Bowl. What were your takeaways and some of your favorite moments from calling the action last year?
Well, it's a great question. Every year is different, obviously. The one thing I always like about the conference is that the quarterbacks are always the story. It's the same thing at every level, whether it be high school, college, or pro. You got yourself a good quarterback. You got a chance to win. And I think the conference went through a transition period over the last few years where they were they needed to find some faces of these teams. Jordan Lynch was one of those guys. Tyler Tettleton down in Ohio was one of the all-time greats to play that program. And then you look at some of these new guys, these new up-and-comers. Last year there was really an emergence, I should say, at the position. And you mentioned the injuries. Toledo, Logan Woodside was the starting quarterback, and they went through a bunch of guys. Matt Johnson at Bowling Green, I thought he was going to be one of the greats, and then he gets hurt early in the year. And they had to go to a guy, Jeff Knappke, who ends up leading them to the MAC title game. But the thing about the conference now is that most of the guys who got a lot of experience last year are back. And so that's what's going to be fun to see this year is, the emergence of Zach Terrell at Western Michigan. Joe Licata is going to be a senior at Buffalo. They had a rough down year last year, but they've got a new coach from Wisconsin Whitewater to take over that program. So in terms of last year, the great moments, I'll be honest with you, I'm a huge fan of Western Michigan and what PJ Fleck's been able to do there in turning that program around. And so watching that program, a team that, basically, they couldn't even compete their first year 2 years ago. And then watching them go last year, winning 7 games, going to a bowl game, and playing Air Force in the Idaho Potato Bowl. They didn't win the game, but they still competed. And having seen them bring in a top 25 recruiting class, it's pretty incredible for the conference to be able to do that.
Yeah, going into this year, I'm a big fan of all those players you mentioned. I really like the position Western Michigan sits in right now with Zach Terrell at the helm, and Corey Davis is just an amazing receiver to watch. And that team, including Jarvion Franklin, who might be one of the better backs, who is one of the better backs in the MAC, but might be the best. I mean, that's going to really be a team to focus on. If you had to put an opinion out there right now, how do you see the MAC finishing this year? Who do you see in the title game, and who do you think is going to walk away with that championship?
Look, I'm again a huge fan of Western Michigan. I think they'll be right there. I know that Toledo's got a lot of talent back. You mentioned Kareem Hunt there when you were talking about some of the players that you like in the conference. Woodside's back at quarterback. They've got a really good defense. The MAC West is always, fascinating to watch because I think they're the most talented division. Frankly, in my opinion, over the last couple of years, and obviously NIU, Northern Illinois, is always going to be there because they don't lose and they're so dominant at home. But I'll pick out of the West. I think Western's gonna compete, and I think PJ gets them over the hump. He better, at least after getting that big contract. I know he's hoping to get them back to MAC prominence. The East will be fascinating. A lot of people don't necessarily know about Akron and what Coach Bowden's done there, but they've obviously they've got Kyle Pohl back at quarterback, and their defense is going to be terrific as well. The Bowling Green, I think they get back to the conference title game as well. The Falcon Fast offenses, they talk about there. Matt Johnson coming back from injury, I think they'll have a good year. And again, people talk about NFL talent. Roger Lewis, the wide receiver from Bowling Green, may be up there with Corey Davis in terms of NFL talent. He's a young guy, transferred in there, and we'll see what they can do. But yeah, I think Western Michigan, Bowling Green, that would be my prediction for the MAC championship up in Detroit.
Yeah, and you talk about all the great coaches that the MAC has, and a guy that I'm happy, being from Northeast Ohio, we're down in Youngstown area. So Mount Union is obviously a D3 powerhouse. Lance Leopold, leaving Wisconsin Whitewater, and he just made them into a dominant powerhouse. And coming into Buffalo, dropped into a perfect position with Joe Licata at quarterback. Terry Bowden is a veteran guy with a great legacy, and they have some really great young coaches. Do you think that if these coaches stay at these schools, in 5-6 years of the MAC can be a really right outside that Power 5 conference, with some of this talent they have?
No, I don't think so. I think they'll be what they are, which is a middle of the road conference that is respected. It's just tough though. They'll never be right there with the Power 5 conferences. They'll be there with, hopefully they're a notch above the Sun Belts of the world, and maybe, the Mountain West, considering up there with them. I don't know. It's tough because the coaches, again, you've got young coaches like Matt Campbell, PJ Flack, and some of the up-and-comers also around the conference. They just don't, the money's not there. If the schools decide they're going to pay out the money, then maybe they can get to that level. But again, it's going to be tough. That's not a knock at the conference. I think they've done a great job over the years developing the coaches that they have and the players and promoting their league. But it's always tough. To be considered right there with the Power 5 conferences, they'll always be a little bit notch below.
Yeah, and to piggyback off that real fast, do you think that we're heading to a place where the Power 5 break away and you see the MAC, the Sun Belt, the CUSA kind of form in their own division, if you will?
They should. The way the landscape of college football has gone, it's difficult. The goals are different. When you go to Akron or Bowling Green or whatever, your goals aren't really to win a national championship. Your goal is to win your conference. Your goal is to go to a bowl game, and that's what's unfortunate about Division I FBS football. You just there's so many teams, and really, when it comes down to it, there's only about 20 that have a shot to win a title, and maybe a few more depending on how you look at it when the season begins. And the money's there for the big schools, and it's tough. So yeah, I think down the line things may change. I think a lot of things will happen over the next 5 to 10 years. The college football playoff is a step in the right direction, but it's a different type of football. When you talk about from a standpoint of just the overall talent. And there are good players in the MAC, but there's good players at every position. Alabama, Ohio State, Florida State, teams like that. So down the line, I would imagine there will be super conferences, so to speak.
Well, Dustin, we definitely appreciate all of your insight, and we appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day. We know you have a lot going on at the Fan, and we couldn't be more humbled and appreciative of you stopping by today and spending some time with us.
Guys, my pleasure. I appreciate the invite, and I'm welcome to come back. I'd love to come back, I should say, anytime.
Yeah, we'd love to have you back on, Dustin, and real fast, OH.
I know. Appreciate it.
Yeah. There you go. Thank you, Dustin. I appreciate it.
All right, guys. Thanks again.
All right, we'll see you.
Okay, bye.
Well, we want to thank Dustin Fox again for joining us on the show, and right now we are also excited to have a beat writer for Kalamazoo Gazette and ML Live Media Group, David Drew. David, great to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, David, thanks again for coming on and kind of short notice and everything, but, thanks again. But quick, real fast, how did you get into, writing with Western Michigan, and, are you an alumni there? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I did attend Western Michigan University. I've been covering Western sports since 2011 and have been on the football beat since 2012. So I've seen, a coach get fired. I've seen a coach get hired, and I'm seeing a whole lot of hype around this Western Michigan program right now.
Well, it's definitely an exciting program, and just a little background with Drew and I, we're both really excitable about the MAC. We love the high octane energy that it gives off. There's so much offensive prowess and so many fun moments that go on, and it's a conference that typically flies under the radar. It does have a great deal going on right now with ESPN and being able to hold the midweek content. So first thing I wanted to start out is, this team top to bottom is pretty stacked. When I'm looking at the offensive depth charts and we see Zach Terrell back for another year, Jarvion Franklin, Corey Davis, Daniel Braverman, do you think this unit is in a position where it can meet or exceed the production from 2014?
I think it absolutely has that potential to. I think one aspect that people have to understand is that people are now going to know who Jarvion Franklin and Zach Terrell are now. I mean, last year, Zach Terrell was coming off a really up and down 2013 season. But last year, he really came into his own, and Jarvion Franklin really burst onto the scene as a freshman. So one thing I'm really looking forward this year is to see how much more Western Michigan opens up the playbook, because last year they really had a lot of success with just limited play calling. They didn't really have to dig deep into the playbook. So I'm interested to see how defenses are going to play Western Michigan now that they kind of have, some bona fide superstars.
Yeah, I agree with that. And this offense has the potential to be lethal. But I just want to, real quick, talk about the defensive side of the ball. They weren't horrible last year. They were kind of middle of the road, I would say. What do they have to do on the defensive side of the ball to really stop these high-powered offenses in the MAC?
Yeah, well, I think last year, especially when you look at Western Michigan, really in the MAC overall, you're going to have a hard time finding just a lockdown defense coming out of the MAC or really any mid-major league, just for the simple fact that there's not a whole lot of defensive linemen that come out of high school that are ready to play and have that game-ready side. So it takes a little while for these mid-major leagues and schools like Western Michigan to develop these players. When it comes down to, for me this year, is the play at the nose guard position, something I was talking about. Last year they had a fifth-year transfer from Michigan. His name was Richard Ash. He came in, had great size. He was a guy who was like 6'3", 315, and really did a nice job of taking on double teams. That allowed Western linebackers to blitz almost freely. Most of the time they were able to get out on the outside and make plays, and that really set up the whole defense because Western's defensive scheme is really oriented on the blitz and being able for the linebackers to make plays. So I think that's a really big key this year is how does that defensive line perform? Are they able to eat up blocks so these linebackers can make plays?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you. I think that's definitely going to be a major point that this defense is really going to have to take into consideration. Not helping the matter is the fact that within the first 4 weeks of the season, they have to take on two of the top 6 teams as of right now in the country in Michigan State and Ohio State. What is a game plan going to look like for trying to take those teams? And I guess, though this might sound odd, and these are definitely David and Goliath type matchups. So how does a team in this position prepare themselves for looking these types of teams in the face and trying to make them believe that they'll keep the game competitive?
Well, if I'm being brutally honest in both of those cases, if you're Western Michigan, you just want to survive. You just want to come out injury-free. If you're a mid-major and you're taking on a Michigan State or Ohio State, that's not going to make or break your season. It would be great to get that win, but I think if you're looking at this Michigan State matchup in the opener, that's one where I think Western Michigan could hang. And possibly if it's close in the fourth quarter, you never know what can happen with the Broncos offense. But for me, it's going to come down to the play up front on both sides of the ball. We talked about Western's defensive line. I'm looking at Western's offensive line now, and they're starting a freshman at center, and Michigan State is probably going to have one of its best front sevens under Mark D'Antonio this year. So how does Western Michigan's offensive line handle that defensive pressure up front? Because I think if Zach Carroll has time, I think there are weaknesses in that Michigan State secondary that Corey Davis is going to find and maybe connect on a couple long balls with Zach Carroll. So really it comes down to getting Zach Carroll time to throw the ball, and defensively it's just hoping that you can contain Connor Cook and any kind of rushing attack they have.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And I really think if you look at this early schedule, Friday night, Michigan State coming into Kalamazoo, that atmosphere is going to be absolutely insane. And I just wanted to get your thought real fast on, these different major conferences, Power 5 conferences they're stopping to play the FCS schools. What is your opinion? You said you just want Western to survive. Do you think you'll see a time where Power 5 conferences don't play the MACs and the Sun Belts of the world?
I don't think so. I think what you're going to see moving forward is, especially in this playoff era, it looks a whole lot better when you can go on the road and let's say you're a Michigan State, Ohio State, one of these teams that are perennially, contending for a playoff spot, and you can go on the road and you can beat, let's say, a Western Michigan team that goes on to win the Mid-American Conference Championship, as opposed to hosting a Kent State team that finishes the season 2-10. I think there's more value in that. So I think what you're going to see moving forward, maybe with scheduling, is you might occasionally see, one of these Power 5, contenders going on the road and playing the best of the mid-major schools, and the teams that they think are going to project really well when these schedules are set.
I think Drew and I both look at this Western Michigan team as a definite contender in the MAC West. We'll get to that in just a little bit here. Like you alluded to, how defeating someone who could go on to be a MAC champion could be, a big help in getting into that playoff situation. And Drew and I have talked about this on our podcast a few different times, and he's not a real believer of it taking place, and I don't really think it's that likely either. But what will it take for a non-Power 5 team to potentially get into one of those 4 seats, or do you think it's even possible? Do you think it's going to come down to the Power 5 schools every year?
I think right now the best that I think a mid-major school could do is hope for one of BCS bowls, hope for a Fiesta Bowl or one of those level bowls. I just don't see a playoff bid until it expands. I think you would have to see a team like Western Michigan beat 4 Power 5 schools in the non-conference and then, go undefeated through the rest of their season and win their conference championship just to even get a look. I mean, look at last year and look at some of these teams that got left out. These are 1, maybe 2-loss teams that have a much better record than, let's say, an undefeated Northern Illinois team that, okay, they beat an Iowa or they beat a Northwestern, but that still doesn't compare to, a one-loss TCU team. So right now, I have a really hard time seeing a team coming from a league like the MAC even getting a look at a playoff bid.
Drew, I'm going to cut you off real quick because I know it's your turn to ask a question, but I'm going to pose a hypothetical situation here. Let's say in 2014 that gut-wrenching loss does not take place in the final week of the regular season for Marshall against Western Kentucky, and they run the board in some pretty dominant fashion, but they don't really play anybody of significance. Do you believe that it would take a situation like Marshall, like you said, with some more games against Big Tens, SECs, Big 12? Is that the type of team that is going to have to be the difference maker, that would be the outlier to get into the seat of 4 seats? I mean, it's tough because that the media is going to push the SEC in there. There's more than likely going to be one very good, if not 2 very good teams from other conferences. So I'm in agreement with you guys that there's a very low probability that it happens, but I mean, I just kind of hope for the best, and I root for the underdog and think that, a Boise State wonderful season like they've had over the past can push them to the point where they could get into 4. So that's really what it's coming down to, is going to have to be one of these non-Power 5 teams that have a significant amount of Power 5 teams scheduled to play.
Yeah, I think there has to be a wow factor about that team. There has to be a team that puts up, 62 points a game. There has to be a team that has that believability factor, something that can, capture a national audience's attention. I think there's a lot of intangibles that would have to go into something like that happening as well.
Yeah, I agree. And if you look at, talking Western Michigan here, what if the improbable happens, and what if they go undefeated? What if they upset Michigan State at home? And what if they go on the road, and beat Ohio State? And then, the second game of the season at Georgia Southern, who could win the Sun Belt? So you could have a possibility. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that Western Michigan's going to go undefeated, but I think that if a team like that could run the table, I do think that a Western Michigan could get into the, to the Final Four. I mean, maybe. What do you think?
I think they would have to get, I think they'd have to get a semi-serious look. I mean, if they go 13-0, I think they absolutely deserve it. Like you said, I think Western Michigan has like the second hardest non-conference schedule in the country. If they can knock off Michigan State, Ohio State, Georgia Southern, they have to go on the road to play their 2 toughest conference games in Toledo and Northern Illinois. I think if they can go 13-0, they absolutely deserve a look. Whether or not they get one, or there's even much talk about them, is one thing. But if they were to go undefeated, they absolutely would deserve a look.
Yeah, I agree. Nick, real fast, I just want to ask one thing. The first 4 games, like we talked about, that's hard. Michigan State, Georgia Southern, Murray State, and Ohio State. The high school football in Michigan and all the Michigan schools, how is Coach Fleck, and how does he handle recruiting when you're recruiting against, 4 or 5 other D1 schools?
Yeah, that's one thing that PJ Fleck has done since day one is recruit and win these recruiting battles. He's really, I would say, probably out-recruiting by far, Eastern Michigan, Central Michigan, and even in some cases, he's winning, some kids that might look at Michigan State, consider from Michigan. So there's still, that there still has to be more winning on the field for, I think, some of these, top-tier recruits coming out of the state. But Fleck and his staff have really done kind of a remarkable job recruiting. They came in saying they were going to recruit the Midwest really hard, and that's what they've done. If you look at really this sophomore class on down to the 2016 class committed, it's pretty impressive. It's really loaded with some talented kids from Michigan, Chicago, Indianapolis, the Midwest region here.
like you said, I mean, they're able to recruit better than the other Michigan schools in the MAC, and then potentially even into the Big Ten. The MAC itself is very, very congested, and I think Drew and I really like three teams on this west side of the conference. My question to you is, which one of these conference games is kind of like the make or break for them? Which is going to be the toughest one for them to get the victory, in your opinion, and why?
I think really this West Division is loaded at the top. I think you look at Toledo, Northern Illinois, and Western Michigan. I think there's two games that stand out, and they both kind of have to go hand in hand. Western Michigan goes on the road at Northern Illinois for their 11th game of the season, and then they have to go to Toledo the day after Thanksgiving to close out the regular season. If Western loses at Northern Illinois, I would say that their chance of winning the division is probably lost. I think Western can afford one loss. I think a 7-1 MAC West team could win the division, and it might even take an undefeated team. I'm not sure. I think it's going to be that top-loaded and that close coming down to the end of the season between these three teams.
Yeah, I mean, this conference, this side of it is like you said, it's absolutely loaded. I mean, we've talked about Terrell, we've talked about Franklin, but, in your opinion, is there a guy, at the end of the season, we're going to be sitting here going, why weren't we talking about him before the season?
That's really hard to say. I'm looking on offense, and there's a couple of youngsters. Western has a transfer wide receiver from Northwoods University. His name's Carrington Thompson, and he was an absolute stud at the D2 level. He's shown a lot of signs that, he could eventually be the next Corey Davis, and I think there's that potential there. So I look to him. There's a couple other wide receivers. There's one thing that I've noticed about P.J. Fleck, being the former receiver that he is I don't think Western is ever going to be low on talent at the wide receiver position in his tenure.
I'd agree. I mean, to me, Corey Davis was one of the most exciting players to watch in the entire country last year. I mean, he just seemed to be able to have his way with defenses at will, and to hear that there's some more people that he's recruiting with his past at the wide receiver position makes me think that it's going to be exciting for years to come. Should Davis decide to exit this year after his junior year, I think Drew and I have done our MAC overview. We both see Bowling Green ending up with their hand raised as the MAC champ. Drew's a fan of Western Michigan. I have taken Toledo because they actually get Northern Illinois and Western Michigan at home, and I think that fact in itself is enough to kind of let me push with them. Do you think at the end of the day, Western Michigan is in a good position to wrap this up this year and take the next step for this program?
I think there's potential, but I don't think they do it this year. I think they get close, but I think Toledo is going to do it. Like you said, I think the schedule sets up really well for them, having Northern Illinois and Western Michigan at home. And I think at the end of the day, I think whoever wins the West Division is going to win the MAC championship game. I think Bowling Green will be good. They're far and above the best team in the East Division, but I'm just not sure they're better than a team that's coming out of what should be a really tough West Division.
Yeah, I agree. And I do think, in my opinion, I think Western Michigan has the offensive power to do it. As we talked about, the defense needs to take that next step. But I'm excited for the season. The season's close. I don't know. I just can't contain my excitement for this upcoming season. I mean, Nick, don't you agree? I mean,
oh, there's no question about it. I think there's a lot of narrative from last year. I mean, I was one of the ones that was pulling for TCU, and out of emotion and not common sense was really upset when Ohio State passed them, and Baylor passed them last year. And so I think they're going to be playing with a lot of the chip on their shoulder that Ohio State was playing with last year. With that being said, what is your perspective in general on this college football season? If you had to pick 4 teams that you think could survive this year and make it to the college football playoffs, who would they be?
Boy, I look at Ohio State again, and I think I look at them, and why aren't they the favorites again? I mean, geez, all the talent they bring back and have, and I mean, you're moving who was your starting quarterback last year to wide receiver now, and I mean, they're probably my odds-on favorite. You know, you're looking down south at the SEC, and you look at Alabama, and I think Auburn's going to be right there. Boy, out west, you know, I don't know. You know, there could be some sleepers out west. I look at maybe in Arizona State. You know, what they showed me last year, they could sneak up. TCU, I think, is going to be absolutely loaded again. And then people have been talking a little bit about Notre Dame. I'm not sure about them. I'm not sold on them, but they could be another team in the mix. But right now, my favorite is Ohio State, just purely looking at their roster and what they have.
I know when I was going through just a couple of days ago, and I was trying to do a predict-all of the schedules this year to try to put together a top 25 list and a playoff. And the one thing for me with Ohio State that I really had a tough time with is when I stopped on the game with Michigan State. And they do play the game at home, but I don't know. There's just something about this Michigan State team that has an allure to me that really made me think long and hard about who I picked to win. Ultimately, I ended up siding with Ohio State. I think that the things set up pretty well for them to have a good opportunity to land at the number one spot. So it's definitely going to be interesting. The addition of the playoffs have definitely been an excitement adder. Something that Drew and I converse about quite often is the expansion of the playoffs. I mean, we've only had 1 year, so you don't want to jump into it. I'm personally not a fan of the expansion. Drew thinks 8 teams is a good amount of teams. What's your take on that?
You know, right now, I think 4 is good. You look at last year, and there's a couple teams that might not have got in. They had a pretty strong argument for it, but right now, I like the 4-team playoff. I think it really puts pressure on teams to go out and schedule, and I think that's something that a lot of these Power 5 schools are learning right now, and they're trying to adjust, is their scheduling, especially in non-conference. So it's going to be really interesting in that aspect to see who beefs up their schedule and who can win in their non-conference. I think that's going to play a huge role, but right now, I'm pretty content with the 14 playoff. You know, there is an argument to be had for the 18 right now, but that's, I think that's still kind of years away.
Yeah, it is. It's a moneymaker right now as a 4-team, but I mean, my argument is, you look at 8 teams and you look at all the money and all the amount of advertising and revenue that could come in, but I don't disagree. I think 4 teams are here to stay for quite some time.
Yeah, I think one day, just because of the money, I think one day we'll see an 18 playoff. I mean, they'd be silly not to eventually expand it just because of all the TV opportunities and money that comes in. But, right now I think 4 is just fine.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you. And, David, I got to say it's been an absolute honor and pleasure to have you on. It's been a good discussion. We'd definitely like to have you back at some point to talk about Western Michigan and the MAC as the season goes along. Drew, is there anything else you want to add?
I just wanted to say, reiterate that, thank you again for coming on kind of short notice. And hopefully at the end of the season, we're talking Western Michigan in the MAC and in the top 25.
Hey, we could be. It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me on, guys.
All right, you take it easy. All right, Drew, well, that about wraps it up for our discussion on Wednesday for the MAC. I think that was a really good conversation, and I think it's really good that it was on a Wednesday because we know within the next, 6-7 weeks, we're going to be seeing a lot more action than just talking about the MAC.
Oh, we're going to be seeing action all over the place. We're going to be seeing Sunbelt all over the place. We're seeing weekday games, which in my opinion is fantastic. I mean, how do you not enjoy sitting on a Tuesday, Wednesday night, Thursday, Friday, whatever it might be, but sitting there watching a college football game of 2 teams that you probably have no affiliation with and you have, no dogs in the fight, but you're just sitting there watching good football, and there is good football all over the nation.
Well, Drew, that's kind of the whole point in itself, and the idea that you don't have a vested interest almost makes it better football to watch. Think about how often when you're watching the NFL and even college that you have somebody on your year-long fantasy football team, or you've played someone in daily fantasy, and you're glued to it to the point where it becomes irritating when the player is not, doing well. I can't tell you how many times last year I was crying and drinking before 1 o'clock. Yeah, the game started at noon, and I've already quit at 1 o'clock, only to find my team in the top 4 or 5% of all lineups at the end of the day. I have found that the best games to watch were when you have nothing at stake and you're just watching it as a fan of the sport.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if you have, daily fantasy stuff on these weekday games, man, that makes it even more fun because, you look at, teams last year that had, dual running backs, or Georgia Southern in the Sun Belt with the triple option, and you're glued to that one game. On Saturdays, you're flicking between 4 or 5 different games, but these weekday games, there's maybe 1 or 2 on at a time, and you can just sit there and enjoy it and enjoy your fantasy no matter what. It's awesome. I love weekday games, no matter who it is.
I agree, absolutely. And if anyone wants to talk to you about your obsession with the MAC, where can they find you?
They can find me, as always, on Twitter at CFBProsDrew. And where can they talk to you at?
They can find me on Twitter's at CFBPros, on Facebook, College Football Pros, and on the interwebs at www.cfbpros.com. Well, we'll wrap it up for the MAC today, and we'll see you tomorrow when we talk about the Pac-12.